Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're watching from. We're very happy you're here. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I welcome you on behalf of the leadership team here at America at a Crossroads. Along with me, our former Congressman Mel Levine and former Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Douglas Brinkley, an extraordinary historian who has written an astonishing number of books on the American presidents and more. 25 books in total, many of them best-selling and award-winning. We are also thrilled to be joined by the incomparable Patt Morrison. Pat, your contributions to journalism are deeply valued, and we're so grateful to you both for being with us tonight. We look forward to an hour of learning from both of you. Looking ahead to next week, please join us for a conversation with Andrew Weissman, former U.S. Attorney and lead prosecutor under Special Counsel Robert Mueller in the investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election. Andrew Weissman is now a legal analyst for MSNBC, among other things that he does, widely respected for his insightful commentary. He'll be in conversation with Warren Only on the timely and important topic, the critical quest for presidential accountability. And a reminder, if you or your friends prefer listening on the go, all of our programs are available as podcasts on your favorite app. Just check the link in our emails or visit our website. And of course, it's also available, the program is available after the fact on YouTube. So if you can't make it for some reason on some future occasion, you have all kinds of ways to watch after the fact, and thousands of people do that. So you can join a growing crowd. Now, without further ado, please welcome the brilliant award-winning journalist, columnist, and moderator par excellence, Patt Morrison. She is truly a Southern California icon, a fact confirmed by a delicious distinction. There is a vegetarian hot dog named after her at the legendary Pink's Hot Dogs. It's called the Patt Morrison Beyond Veggie Dog. In case you're ever there, topped with sauteed peppers and onions, mushrooms, tomatoes, and melted mozzarella cheese. Now that's a legacy. Pat, thank you so much for your service to America at a Crossroads. The show is now yours.
Always a pleasure, Janice, and thank you so very much. I asked for M&Ms as a topping, but they wouldn't let me go there. But you have seen, heard, read about Douglas Brinkley for certain as you pay attention to not only this election cycle and this political cycle, but the cycles past. He's a humanities chair and professor of history at Rice University, a presidential historian, a contributing editor at Vanity Fair, serves on the boards of museums and colleges and historical societies. He's written myriad books about this nation, from Hurricane Katrina to the U.S. space program and Walter Cronkite, and he has a Grammy Award. Doug, my friend, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Pat. I really appreciate it, as always.
You know, the word unprecedented has been used so often, it's kind of wearing itself out, and I don't see anything in the thesaurus to rival it. But let's look more closely at some specific areas of policy and power where Donald Trump has veered from the path and the pattern of his predecessors, sometimes not too far away, sometimes way off course, arguably legally still, but pushing the envelope on unexercised limits. And sometimes he goes beyond legal and constitutional, as we have seen. You've got a lifetime of study of American history and American presidency. Is there any scenario in all of this that prepared you to see what we're seeing now?
Not really. I mean, what Donald Trump sort of invented this second term of his is day one, meaning I was there working for CBS News in Washington for Trump's second inaugural, and the weather was bad, and people that covered it within the Capitol, they moved inside. It was a little bit like the first inaugural of Trump. Then he went over to the Capitol Arena and it turned on the flashing lights, the Hulk Hogan, World Federation Wrestling effect, Evel Knievel deal, and started signing executive orders with his giant signature, trying to create this day one momentum for himself. The first one he signed was to pardon the January 6th insurrectionist. And it's a stunning thing to do when one considers how recent our memories are of what happened at the Capitol. Now, here President Trump was saying, oh, they're not that bad. But then he went in rapid fire way doing executive orders galore. In this regard, he thought he would swamp Washington himself, pour everything out there and keep everybody in a chaotic, disoriented way. Our question now about his executive orders because he did not have 100 days of legislative victories. Uh,
Unlike FDR.
FDR had like 70 some in his 100 days, legislative with sticks. Trump's just signing, 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 and some do stick, like changing the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. But as we saw in the first term with the Muslim ban, the courts say no. And we're looking at all these things. He signed these executive orders, and many of the courts are saying not, can't do, can't do, can't do. That doesn't mean ones aren't getting done. It just means it's probably seems like a bigger takeover of Trump by signing all these, but when you closer inspection, most don't hold up to legal scrutiny.
But still, they create all sorts of destruction and chaos. Now, you were recently at the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award, which went to former Vice President Mike Pence, because it recognized him for putting his life and career on the line to ensure the constitutional transfer of presidential power on January 6, 2021. I can't imagine another point in history where we would have to congratulate a vice president for doing his job. Neither can I imagine a moment where the vice president is being threatened for doing his job and the back of the president of the United States is turned on him.
Excellent point. And when I was there at Columbia Point in Boston area at the Kennedy Library for the event, I was saying, my God, this is where we're at. Mike Pence is the national hero. I always saw him as quite malleable as vice president, allowed Trump to do whatever he wanted and was cautious about what he said. However, hearing him there and reflecting on that moment when he had the fortitude to say no, that you did not win the 2020 election. And he had consulted even with former Vice President Dan Quayle, Pence, another person you don't think becomes a hero in the 21st century. But they followed the Constitution, they knew the law, they listened to their lawyers, and so in the end, Pence did well, and with him was his wife and family, and they were there in the Capitol, and the terror of all of that, and while people are screaming, "Hang Mike Pence," and so he did a good solid turn when he got the award in his speech, and I left thinking, I have more respect for Pence than I did when I came into the auditorium.
Our regular viewers will know that you can put a question in the Q&A box, and we will try to put it to Doug as we move along through this program. And if you see the Q&A box, please put your name, where you're from, and your question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I suppose we can go back to the founders and the idea of what is the presidency, that George Washington was the right man for the moment, like Cincinnatus, he laid down power and went home to his plow, setting a kind of precedent. But the test came early on. The test of the president versus the legislative branch, the test of the president versus the judicial branch with Marbury versus Madison. And here you have with Trump, somebody who says, almost to echo Andrew Jackson, who defied judicial orders, Supreme Court orders, saying essentially, yeah, you and whose army? Who's going to enforce this? Where does that leave us?
Important again, Pat. All of what you just said. Look, George Washington had to invent the job. He did not. He was a reluctant first president. Was a Revolutionary War hero after the Battle of Yorktown. His stock could have been higher, but in the end, he was the only leader out of the Revolutionary War that could have kept the slave-owning South and the industrial non-slaving North together. Because Washington was loved in his home state of Virginia, but he was also loved in New York, where at Newburgh, West Point, he guarded the Hudson River, or in New Jersey, where he won the Battle of Princeton and Trenton. And Washington got inaugurated in New York, and he went try to figure out what to do, and it dawned on him that you only go 2 terms. It was not a constitutional amendment, but he served 2, and he was asked to say 3, he said no. And he only used one bit of one executive order, because if you read our Constitution, presidents don't have the rights they've taken. It's just by incrementalism It's grown into the tornado you've got right now. He signed one for the Neutrality Act to keep America out of wars with Spain or Britain, France, try to be neutral. And it really was, as you rightfully point out, with Marbury versus Madison, 19th century, early republic. It's about the power of the Congress and the legislature. They have the purse strings and the power of the Supreme Court. Nobody thought of presidents as being quite the deity, except we in 1800 our country created the two-party system, and that shocked the founders. I mean, it was Jefferson representing the Democrat Republicans, and Hamilton the Federal, and John Adams the Federalist, and they went at loggerheads. It was brutal in 1800, and people went in despair. And because how do you run a democracy if each side gets that ardent against each other? And one aspect came out is when we get a president we think is good, we inflate them a lot. I mean, it was conscious effort to make Washington, the District of Columbia, Washington, named after, the general and the first president, or Washington State or Washington counties. Washington's on everybody listening's dollar bill or on the quarter, and he's like a patriarchal figure. They go to Washington, D.C., and no building can be taller than the Washington Monument. And we've periodically did that in the 19th century. Jefferson is one of the founders, but Jefferson said he didn't even want his name's not on his tombstone. He refused to have it say President of the United States
Hmm.
because he thought that was a service. And instead, he was founder of University of Virginia or author of the Declaration, et cetera. So the big moment in presidential power, some people call executive order number one, was Abraham Lincoln, because in the middle of the Civil War, he ended up issuing towards the end the Emancipation Proclamation. And in one swoop of the pen, basically doing away with slavery. Although, even with that, there were caveats. If you stayed in the Union, you could keep slaves, addressing that to Maine and Kentucky and places. But that became giant. Wow, Lincoln freed the slaves. But again, it became more Supreme Court and Senate Congress, and then Theodore Roosevelt at the beginning of the 20th century he's the one who it used to be called the Executive Mansion. Theodore Roosevelt's the one who names it the White House. And from 1901 to 1909, TR starts using presidential power in unprecedented ways because he didn't want to be flummoxed by a Senate Congress. And if you like what TR does, like saving the Grand Canyon, so they didn't want it for a national park, so he used an executive authority to declare it, you applaud it. But when a president then does something that one might consider heinous, like FDR using an executive order for Japanese internment camps in World War II, you're saying, why is a president able to do that? But it's the Roosevelts that built both of them. By FDR's time, 4 terms, he did 3,400 executive orders.
During the Depression and wartime, which we do not have either, at least so
That's
far
the
right
big
now.
thing. And he did depression and wartime. And then like in wartime, he used the Manhattan Project was an executive order.
Hmm.
But it's more limited. I mean, you'll find like Eisenhower with going to Little Rock, executive order. John F. Kennedy created the Peace Corps. But it started getting used by Barack Obama, new presidential power. If we recall, when Obama won his historic election in 2004,
Hey,
I'm sorry, 2008, and in 2009, he ended up doing Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and that was big. And he got it through barely because of the Great Recession, all Democratic votes. Mitch McConnell said, I'll not talk to or do any business with Obama. And then the Tea Party movement started. And Obama, for being such a brilliant campaigner politician, was able to win a second term, but it was closer than we remember, really. Mitt Romney was in there till really the last debate. And he had killed or led the killing of Osama bin Laden, Obama, which gave him this kind of commander in chief credential. But he then became Obama basically had to get around Congress, Senate, sign executive orders, and that to get around it, and that's continued, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But Trump on day one, this cycle has taken it into the stratosphere on and because he believes what Nixon believed, that if the president does anything, it must be legal.
So let's get to some more questions. And one of them you just kind of alluded to, the powers that were already there in the abstract, to what extent Trump is using, abusing, overusing them. And what is he like creating out of whole cloth by saying we have an emergency because we're at war with a Venezuelan gang, therefore I can do what FDR did, which was intern the Japanese or whatever his equivalent of this is. Some of this seems to be stretching the abstract into the real, and some of it seems to be making things up out of whole cloth. Am I right?
Yes, you're right. And much of it just winging it. President Trump knew nothing about history in his first term. He knew a lot about real estate. It's not a derogatory comment I'm trying to log. He just knew nothing about American history. But incrementally himself, he started hearing about the way, what the Monroe Doctrine is. And when you simplify it, you think it's you control the whole hemisphere. Nobody's allowed to come in. Or William McKinley on tariffs, which he got on that hobby horse. And James K. Polk is ranked pretty high because he grabbed land from Mexico. And in that spirit, Andrew Jackson has become the all seasons presidential hero of Donald Trump, first term and second, because Jackson always had that word populist against the elites. That's what Trump started marketing himself as. And people may forget or but not be aware, in 1824, Jackson lost an election and insisted he didn't. And he screamed bloody murder and said, "Foul, I won, I won. I've been stolen from me, corrupt bargains going on." And he ran again in 1828 and won. And the amount of hubris Andrew Jackson displayed is Trump-esque, with the particularly against the banking system and the monetary system. But in a famous case, Worcester versus Georgia, Supreme Court case, with Supreme Court Justice John Marshall overseeing it, the Supreme Court said that Jackson had no rights to do the Trail of Tears or Indian removal, that these were ancestral native lands and it was illegal to boot people off of their property. That was the Supreme Court, and he defied it, Jackson, and said, let him enforce it.
Yeah. John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it, which sounds very Trumpian.
It is. And
Um,
so when you're, and not just President Trump, but this circle of lawyers around them all there, when you give somebody like Trump who has that egomaniacal personality and then tell him that, look, here's a president, Jackson did this, and he goes for it. But your original point, Pat's the one of the ones that the media is not talking about, but keep your eye on it, is using that term national security. Know the Venezuelan gang is not a war, it's not Pearl Harbor or Hitler declaring war on us. But Trump's wandering into that, trying to see what are my
he
war.
just used it for movies, right? Foreign movies are a national security threat.
All across the board. And he may go into a place like Panama Canal if the cargo ships, his polls are bad, the tariffs not kicking in that he wanted, as a bold statement. We're securing the Panama Canal, even though it's not, it's not American territory, but we're there to secure it. And you hear that with Greenland. We're going to take it no matter what from Denmark because we need it for national security. So he's become this 19th century expansionist and a 19th century tariff monger. And it's shocking some conservatives in the Republican Party. The tech world of Silicon Valley or the Musketeers and the like, they're worried about the Wild West of they want an unregulated future, and Trump's providing that. but many Fortune 500 companies do not like this kind of roller coaster stock market, a lack of coherency going on. And so he's starting to rub Wall Street the wrong way, Trump, and he's going to have to watch that side of his back because they were kind of with a nod and a wink thinking, Trump's kind of offbeat and kooky, but we got through the first term. He got three Supreme Court justices in. Nobody would believe he would do this sort of calling the Canada the 51st state and jacking tariffs up like he did to China because it creates global economic insecurity.
Um, your questions for Doug Brinkley, put them in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to as many as we can a little later in the program. Doug, a lot of this seems to be the change in the nature and the power of the presidency, because as I understand it, the founders saw the legislative branch, Congress, as being more potent. And yet Congress seems to have backed away and ceded more and more ground, more and more territory to this imperial presidency. And Trump is not hesitating to take advantage of this. And so many members of Congress have said anonymously that they are in physical fear for themselves and their families if they were to stand up to Trump. We've seen attacks of congressmen, other congressmen on the floor of Congress, but this too seems, here's that word again, unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember when Dwight Eisenhower was president, Ike, a Republican, moderate Republican president, had to deal with McCarthyism, had to deal with the nativist, anti-communist movement that was, the Red Scare of the 50s. But the Republican Party, which McCarthy was a senator of, from Wisconsin, they turned on Joe McCarthy, meaning when McCarthy dared to go after the army, you see the Republican Party shifting against McCarthy and Eisenhower, dispensing of him. And then if you look at what happened to Nixon and Watergate, it's not just Woodward and Bernstein and the Washington Post story or follow the money, all important. The Nixon tapes are important. But the big smoking gun, the big moment really was when the Republicans like Barry Goldwater, a conservative, they came to Nixon said, "You lied to us to our face. We're done with you." Meaning the Republican Party turned against their own Republican president. We're not seeing that right now. We're seeing Trump control the GOP. Now, if it might be splintering on the budget here, we'll see how that goes. There is Lisa Murkowski who's been brave, but by and large, what's given Trump this sort of lion's roar strength has been the fact that they're afraid of him in the Republican Party, and so he owns it. It's his party, and where everybody for a moment at January 6th, there was the Liz Cheneys in and they all kind of got knocked out. And Trump feels that he could do anything he wants. He owns the party. They better not defy him, and he's willing to openly defy the Supreme Court at this juncture because his view of life, Donald Trump, is I pick you three guys or three, Amy Coney Barrett, a woman, but pick you three to the Supreme Court, and I own you. You have to rubber stamp me. And, Trump's seeing the Republican Party rubber stamping him. So he's shocked when suddenly Justice Roberts or Amy Coney Barrett are dissent with Trump. It throws him because he didn't see that coming. He thought we own the court. I own the Supreme Court because the court's verdict, a foolish one that which increased presidential powers just, a year and a half ago.
He also is extending the powers that nominally exist for the presidency to a lot of destabilizing influences. I mean, presidents since FDR have thought about using the IRS to get people they don't like. But here is Trump, who's threatening the nonprofit status of Harvard, the biggest target around. Nothing would stop him from, say, going after nonprofits like the Center for Southern Law and Poverty, women's choice, women's rights nonprofits, and taking that approach to undoing these institutions by some of the same kind of bullying tactics, and yet using powers that the president nominally has and have been tested occasionally. Nixon's own IRS director refused to do what Nixon told him to do, a gentleman who died recently. But I don't think that people aren't saying no to Donald Trump when he wants to do these things, except now there's a little more momentum and pushback.
Yeah, and I would, we can go back in history in different decades, but I would kind of focus on the long 60s, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, because in that period, the progressives, liberals, they were winning, winning, winning. I mean, they put through all these environmental measures, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Nixon Endangered Species Act passed, like 90, 2-0 or something. NEPA created on the environment, affirmative. Nixon was for affirmative action. Johnson, it just rained government programs, Medicaid and Medicare, NPR, PBS, Wild and Scenic Rivers, HUD, Head Start. I mean, it was endless with Great Society. And the conservative movement got worried. And the key document that I'd like people to look up online is the Lewis Powell memo. Lewis Powell became a Supreme Court justice, but when he wrote the Powell memo, he was head of the tobacco lobby. And in it, quite articulately, he says the left, liberals, the regulators have won. They're killing us. They own the universities, they own the faculty, they're running mainstream media, they got all the big newspapers, they've got control of the federal bureaucracy. We're losing, and the fear of the Chamber of Commerce's, which Powell was representing, was that we are the bad guys. We're being blamed, DuPont or Dow or Chrysler or IBM, because of Ralph Nader, public citizen, consumer activism, Rachel Carsonism, banning DDT, and that the corporate world was on their heels by this people's movement that wanted the federal government to be hyper-regulatory. So they created a counter narrative starting in the 70s and in the Powell memo, he says it'll take 40 years. They had that much of a head start. And what our goal is, we're going to have to let money be at the universities, so it's controlled by money interest. We're going to have to create our own television networks, our own radio networks, our own lecture series, we're going to have to create a movement. And things got born like the Cato Institute and the American Enterprise, boomed and the Koch brothers and Hoover Institute and all of them got on the page on stop regulating capitalism, corporatism. And what happened is they've gotten highly effective, and they've started living now with a country hearing a lot of them, and the belief that crept in that the federal government is screwing up. They lied to you about who killed JFK. They lied about Vietnam and Cambodia. The Pentagon's ripping the taxpayers off. And, no new taxes, cut taxes, because federal government is inherently wrongdoing. And they now have won with Trump, because Trump first election, you could have written it off and nobody quite knew what he was. But this time around, post January 6th, post 34 felonies, they went along with let's get while the getting's good. And you see that in the Project 2025
Which he said
report.
he didn't read. And,
He read
it's possible, but people are certainly giving him all these cues.
Getting all the cues, and he gets in, and it's a blueprint. But it's just another reiteration of the Powell report from the 70s. But nobody thought what Trump surprised everybody with is that it was pow, pow, pow. He was going to throw all of this at once, the whole kit and caboodle, all on day one in his first 100 days. And so it has shocked some of the conservatives that don't like federal regulation, that want small government, but the extent, the uncontrollable aspect of Trump is now even worrying the people that gave him, money and support because he seems to be coming unglued. And you either have to believe his own rap that Trump's some kind of genius that none of us understand, or he's a carny, sales guy with a huge narcissistic ego that's just running amok over our Constitution and a democracy.
And
You-
some of them, maybe the more farsighted, are seeing that if President Trump can use these powers, so can a president fill in the name of a Democrat when it comes along. And so the question of these institutions, if you're going to attack a nonprofit that you don't like because it's too liberal, you can decertify the tax exempt status of an institution down the road you don't like because it's too conservative. So is there enough is there a magnetic north to that kind of thinking that's going to put some brakes on here? Because certainly Trump isn't going to put brakes on himself.
that, what you just said, and then the fear of people on the huskings that are running for Congress, going by Republicans that now are going to have to talk to constituents that are saying, "Are you touching my Social Security? Are you cutting Medicaid and Medicare?" Because these have become birthrights, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and people are counting on them. And so it's looking good in the sense in a crass political equation for the Democrats in Congress, except one doesn't detect where their leadership's coming. I mean, if Trump's at 39% approval with all he's doing, and you see Congress, wallowing in 24% approval. I mean, Democrats at like 24. You see press, the public not trusting. So the Democrats have to find an offensive message and leadership and a vision of tomorrow, because they've been living off of "you got to elect me because I'm not Trump."
Mhm.
And that strategy has not worked. People want to still believe, like you see how Bernie Sanders or AOC got some traction going by just talking about tomorrow, better wages, we respect the workers, and it gets some wind in the sail of the Democratic Party, while Trump's going to flounder here with a divided a budget fight with Republicans and overreach on tariffs and muddling around on the world stage. Part of his day one promise was to end the Ukraine-Russia war, and what's going on in Israel, Gaza, and of course, none of that's come to fruition in the first 100 days.
Well, given your knowledge of the historical reach of presidents, uh, at some point Trump will exit the scene, and but then what becomes of Trumpism? Does it fall apart without Trump? Is this going to be treated like an imperial presidency, and second, third generation Trumps will try to succeed? Or is it embedded enough in the national character? We voted this guy in twice, and the rest of the world, perhaps, and people at home here, are saying, what kind of country is it that could give this power to this man?
It's Trump's persona can't be replicated. He's, been on TV since the 1980s, with his red tie and his suit, and been on every talk show known to humankind. He owned casinos, was in showbiz, sports, and you're not going to be able to manufacture the next Trump. But I think Trumpism will be alive. I mean, I think you're watching the grooming in real time of Marco Rubio and JD Vance, who are emerging as having communication skills and gall and know to not cross swords with Trump. And if they're going to be kind of the hope that of the Trump crowd, I think those two at this juncture, and there may be another one that comes into that, but Trump seems to be getting weary. He's slowing down. I say that as he's speeding up every minute, but he is 70, late 70s. He's traveling at a breakneck speed, and I'm sure that the modern Republican Party is thinking, what happens after Donald Trump? Is he a one-time phenomenon? But I think Trumpism is going to last for a while because I see no movement to revert back to Bushism or NAFTA, or I think Trump has effectively blown up that Republican Party, and he's made it into his brand.
Um, the framers weren't fools, and they didn't believe that all presidents were going to be honorable and gentlemen, and that's why we have the emoluments clause, and that's why we have the capacity for impeachment. But here's Trump, who's steamrolling all of this. He just made a deal with Qatar, which is arguably private, but there's no such thing as like fully private. Sorry, I was a critic in the background here. Um, no such thing as fully private in a lot of countries. He's got this meme coin that he launched and then announced it would become part of the national currency reserve after he made his money. So again, where's the brakes being applied to this and the conflicts, the immense conflicts that it creates right out in the open?
That is to me the most painful thing of our time, Pat, because there's nobody reining him in, and he is using it to marketeer off the presidency. And when you're pouring so much at the system, you're blowing things up, you're demolishing so many bureaus and institutions all at once. It's hard for the legal establishment, so to speak, to grab a hold of the scruff of the neck of these issues, like, how is the profiteering of the possible profiteering of Trump right now. And it is part of, if its strategy is just blind people in a sandstorm of things, and how can you then gear up, and Trump now has president of the way Joe Biden pardoned his family and others. If worst case scenario, Trump will end up pardoning himself and all of the people that he's are close to or in an alliance with. And that to him is a get out of jail free card, that they might as well go try to make an extra $1 billion for Trump Inc. And if for some reason, my whole life I've escaped going to jail. I've been charged a zillion times. I'll escape it again. But if for some odd reason I get nailed, I just pardon myself. Um, that's unfortunately where we're at right now. And we just have to realize that you're running now to the midterm election. The resistance in the end, as Democrats like to talk about, will be these midterm elections, because at least Democrats get Congress back. They'll regain investigatory powers. I'm not sure the country's ready for impeachment in round three of Donald Trump, and it wears on everybody, but it's at least another counterbalance. Now it's just guardrails breaking everywhere, and we're having to focus on that election.
Well, I'd like to start getting to some of your questions, which you can put in the Q&A box. And before we do, the last question on the point you were just making, historically, certainly modern presidents, maybe except for book deals, has any president ever left office richer than he entered it?
Well, they do, but not the day they're leaving office. They only do because of the inflated value of a celebrity and a celebrity culture. If it's true of Andy Warhol's America is true, and celebrity is the great stock and trade in our country, then presidents leave and they have endless opportunities to sit on corporate boards. I mean, Reagan left the presidency and it was shocking at the time. He left and he got $1 million a speech. He went to Japan.
Japan.
And then people sign their presidential memoirs and get paid, 10 million bucks right out of the gate. So
But
being
they don't make it money out of the Oval Office
No,
while they're in it.
that's the difference. That's a difference. And only Trump is behaving in that way, except you can find little circumstances where something like FDR used to sell Christmas trees on Roosevelt Farms and say, have a New Deal Christmas, and take ads out in the New York Times.
Oh,
But it's this, and with he's doing it like looking to build Trump properties in the Middle East as we speak, and using his family to become a global, robber baron of unbelievable proportions. And I think having Musk next to him there in those 100 days, Musk we like to say, Muhammad Ali's heavyweight champion of the world or the World Series in baseball. Well, you have Musk, the richest man in the world, with Donald Trump, and that's an alliance for Trump. That's that's someday there'll be a presidential library for Donald Trump, and you'll see people like Musk pouring money in to build these non-governmental, private sector tributes, memorials to Trump as if he were George Washington of the anti-regulatory America.
Well, and certainly as I want to get to later is talk about the kind of rewriting of history through federal institutions like the Smithsonian as a historian. That's of interest to you. But let's get to questions. So Stephen LA said, I thought Biden was an excellent president. Where would you rate him and where would you rate Trump at this point?
Well, they're in the middle of a presidency. It's hard to rate because it's a ongoing event. We usually like to wait 25 years, Freedom of Information Act and the like. But we can say this about Biden. There, Biden was at for a moment the right man for the job when he defeated Trump, and he did continue doing bipartisan things and influential Inflation Reduction Act, seen big and consequential. But that mistake of running again when he knew he was after kind of seeming to be a placeholder and giving the bench of the Democratic Party some open space to find new leadership, he didn't leave. And that it's easy in hindsight, but people like David Axelrod and Ezra Klein and James Carville and others were warning, warning, warning. And then that debate performance of Biden occurred with Trump. And we live in an age of optics, and television whether it's TV, or whether it's our iPhone. Um, it was a bad night for Biden, and it was shocking. And they were at that moment, the Democratic Party was in real crisis, and by forcing and waiting and eating up clock for another month, another 5 weeks, instead of saying, "Look, my health's a little bit fickle. I'm going to run the country, and I believe in Kamala Harris." He stalled and waited, and so he has a chance of coming back if Trump, dissolves and our whole country unravels, but then Democrats come back and
Right.
Trump can remake himself. But he's not Jimmy Carter leaving the White House in his 50s.
Yeah. Um,
It,
I,
he's going to have to. The rebuild is tough, and the years he doesn't have to do it. He's having a hard time raising money for his presidential library in
let
Delaware.
let me ask you, I'm sorry if we can get some shorter answers so we can get more questions in. So to wrap up that last one about Trump, where you would rate him so far,
Well, I
even though
think
he's halfway through his second term.
it'd been a disaster. I mean, the joke was only James Buchanan was ranked by him, but the truth of the matter is he's not in the club of presidents. It's all these other people who believed in the Constitution and the rule of law, one way or another, and then there's Trump, who's on his own, a kind of authoritarian island, and so.
Like Alcatraz. Uh, so let's hear from, well, Ruth has a question about the Alien Enemies Act. She assumes it was not intended to be used the way Trump is using it. And in fact, I think it was Korematsu versus the United States, the case that essentially said when you imprison the Japanese Americans, you acted illegally.
Yes, exactly. And that was supposed to put an end to it. But because I'm a historian, I pay keen attention. Trump's first term, he said the greatest thing FDR did was intern the Japanese. He said the greatest thing Eisenhower did was Operation Wetback of deporting um, Mexicans. He said these things. And when you study as a professional historian, you're looking at the arc of justice and equality marching forward. These are the low ebb marks of FDR, the low ebb mark of Ike. But for Trump, those were heroic things they did. It, it it's a it's we're it's in a time we're in a authoritarian peril. But this is a very strong country economically, spiritually, commercially, and one has to believe that we'll get through the Niagara Falls of problems that we have with this second Trump term.
We have a question from Alan who says there's an op-ed in the New York Times today called "The Presidency Has Become Too Powerful," about that Biden and Obama did expand the presidency as any president would want to. But how far can that go, and what kind of curtailment, what kind of curtailment is in the offing?
I think this is the core problem. The power of the presidents are something the founders wouldn't have fathomed. That we've allowed this to happen now after um, Watergate, Vietnam, Nixon's um, lies. You started, there were then the Church committee hearing. Frank Church came about, and there started being a feeling of slowing down the imperial presidency. It would be something that was on the minds of people like Gerald Ford or Jimmy Carter, even that we're not imperial. We're going to go through and do it the right way. But it's grown and grown and grown, I mentioned just what that person has just said. I mentioned how Obama had a result to presidential power, and then Biden came in and in his first days undid all of Trump's executive orders, and now Trump's undoing all of Biden's executive orders, and the country loses. And we need whichever happened to the Senate and Congress. It's sad now, but if you're a Democrat, you cannot be in a photo, or it's rough. Gretchen Whitmer did it, being in a photo op with Donald Trump. You can't do it, or a Republican, can't be seen with Bernie Sanders or Biden. And this is no way to run a country. We got to be as Americans, but there's no sign that bipartisanship is scoring a lot of points right now. But it very well may in coming years. It's just this is the time of the hyper imperial presidency gone berserk.
Phil in Tucson points out that Trump has been requesting that the Supreme Court treat case after case urgently as an emergency. What kind of latitude does the court have? Can they say, we'll get around to it in our own sweet time? Does it look upon this president in particular as someone bringing urgent constitutional issues to it that need urgent treatment?
I'm sure they're all have a different mind on this. There are nine different minds, but overall, the Roberts Court seems to be part of the Federalist Society idea of a strong precedent. They've been fighting for it for a long time. I just always think their intellectual thinking about it was based on a rational player as president, because even though we've had bad presidents, people have always gone, nobody's wanted to shatter the civic norms willy-nilly, or dump on the, dump on the Constitution, or do what Trump's been doing. So they're caught now, the Supreme Court, by Trump throwing everything at them and wanting an immediate answer and trying to stop their deliberations and rush them into deciding on a crisis a day. I think it's part of Trump's strategy. But our judicial system in many key places, I'd say at least half of things Trump's been trying have been tangled or up or shot down by federal judges saying it's not going any further. And so, for the time being, our legal system's holding up, but it's very stressed.
Some of his own appointees have been the ones telling him not a chance. Marcy has a question. Why has George W. Bush not spoken out against the degradation of democracy by Trump and Congress? She says it's disappointing not to hear from him. I know there's a precedent, you know this far better than we, of presidents not criticizing their predecessors. But as you say, this has gone so far beyond questions of policy and yes or no on a piece of legislation.
You'd have to ask George W. Bush that question.
You don't live far away. Maybe you can at his door.
But I've been surprised and disappointed that he has stayed as mute as he does. It's a lot of smoke signals. George W. Bush does. Melania Trump's unveiling the portrait of Barbara Bush in the White House, but George W. Bush and Laura won't come for his own mother's portrait unveiling. So, he's the original one who turned around to Michelle Obama, and Trump's the first inaugural and said, that's some weird shit. And, there's some body language you could read at Jimmy Carter's funeral if you'd like. But when it comes to being a profile of courage, of being an ex-president now who has to stand up for our armed forces and for CIA, which the building's named, the Bush, CIA is named after Bush, or George W. Bush has chosen to be muted and kind of stay out of harm's way and paints wounded warriors and portraits, and has decided that the smartest thing to do is stay out of the political firestorm.
Would it make any difference at this point if he did speak up?
If he did so in a forceful way, if he held a speech and started way, they still have supporters. The old Bush Republicans are out there, and some of them went to Trump because they figured I can't be for Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden's a disaster, and you might be able to move the meter in a way of limiting some of Trump's more nefarious behavior. But I don't think anything will stop Trump from being Trump. He's on a true social high. He's why we've been doing this. He's probably launched two new assaults somewhere and affronts in the world, and I don't, but for his own biography, George W. Bush, I think he's making mistake of allowing Trump to run rampant over everything the Bush family had believed in, which is duty, honor, country.
Victor wants to know whether you define this massive use of executive orders and these emergency declarations as authoritarian and anti-democratic. Have they crossed that line?
It yes, but I more look at it is he sees no downside in signing them because the media covers it. He looks like the big guy doing things. It's a reality TV show now, The Oval Office, and his view is President Trump, let's see what sticks. I'll do it all, and then I can say I was the one, and then find who didn't let it happen, blame somebody. So it's like running a fantasy White House. He's just signing these things, saying it's happening. In a way, it's a form of gaslighting. And invariably, the press bites, and they feel it's their responsibility. And then, boom, we're all spinning that Trump just did this. And then we find out that he doesn't have the legal authority to do that. And we're going back and forth right now. It's dizzying. And so it is a deliberate strategy of Trump, who's been this way his whole career. He's been this way. Everything to him is this sort of odd negotiation. He goes nuclear immediately, meaning in a one-on-one, you blow it up, take it to the worst place, then walk down. Very few people want to live like that, and countries don't want to because it's a dangerous world, and that's a
Yeah.
dangerous way to be doing public policy.
Um, on December 8th, 1941, FDR went to Congress and asked Congress to declare war because it's Congress's power. Robert's question, and we've had presidents who waged military actions, police actions like Korea. Robert's question is, can the president decide to use the Enemy Aliens Act to go to war? How far would Trump push this division of authority with Congress and presumably even within his own administration?
Well, he's been trying to go for that. He's trying to see how much authority he has, but the courts have told him, no, that you don't have that power in dealing with the deportation of to El Salvador and in a number of cases. So he's trying out how that can hold up. But the thing to be, we can watch that play out. What you can't watch them play out when we're in a world now where Pakistan and India are at war, and all that's going on in the Middle East, and as I said, Russia and all. Trump may see polling going down. It frustrates him. He might start hearing criticism in the Wall Street Journal and Fox about this, that, this, and he starts panicking that he's got to do a big leapfrog, something big. and send American troops somewhere or declare war more than a tariff war, or as I said, retake the Panama Canal or something to show he's muscular. Um, the good news about Trump's first presidency, he did not put troops in harm's way. There was a hitting of the chemical weapons facility in Syria, but he doesn't show that side that he wants to risk American lives, which may be a silver lining of our time right now. But when you get in a corner and your whole life and legacy is on the line, he may do what sometimes journalists call during the Clinton years the wag the dog.
After the movie, yes.
After the movie, I'm
Yeah.
going to leap. I'm going to reframe the narrative going on here by saying America has this gigantic national security crisis at hand.
Uh,
Um, but I think we're already in one. The tariff wars, I think they're going to have to roll out the bilateral tariff, economic strategy here, because right now it's stillborn, and where are no deals being made. But the administration's claiming in a week they'll start seeing maybe U.S. China or U.S. India or whatever the case may be starts.
like 2 weeks until infrastructure week. But so you're a TV guy, and I know you've got a clock in your head. So let me, before we begin to wrap up, ask you about what amounts to an ideological leveling or purge of the arts, the humanities, the intention to recreate in the Smithsonian institutions, the national institutions and museums of the country, a new Trump-driven ideology about what American history is and to mute what he doesn't want to hear about it.
Well, it's just been horrifying to be on. I've been a long time professor of history. I'm on boards of museums. He's drying up philanthropy, donor money. It's targeting, when you target a whole group of people, it's not okay to target, here are 100 people, and it turns out five of them shouldn't be on that list. It's terrible. But, there are a lot of great people teaching. Universities are going to hold up. We're going to have to weather this like we weathered a McCarthyism or Red Scare, or weathered a Vietnam climate when 58,000, Americans were killed in Vietnam, and our civil societies seem fractured over protest. The point of American history, it reminds us that our own times aren't uniquely oppressive, that we've gone through these crucibles before. And so, by all means, don't get sick over Donald Trump, meaning don't hurt your spiritual life or your family life, or to the point where you become dysfunctional out of a rage. Instead, find the good things out there, local political candidate, gear up for elections, or while just as something's being dismantled by Trump at this moment, websites coming down on history and things, those websites can come back up too in coming years. So it's not worth being all despair. You got to have some fortitude.
That's why we like to wrap up on a little bit of a positive note. And if you want to carry that on for another minute, give people a sense of how to look. What are the pressure points that you think might be the most effective in expressing and maybe even having an effective change on some of these reversals of fortune we're going through?
Well, Pat, I'm just picking one because, let's say something like climate change, which 3 years ago was everybody talking about it. In California, you still have to talk about it, and you're going to be continuing to. But on the public square, suddenly people are mute about it. And what do we do? All climate monies are being killed by, Trump. And it's a real giant rollback the Trump administration's doing. But meanwhile, there are local things, local state parks, local beaches in California, local, programs to connect young kids to the natural world. If you have an environmental bent or a naturalist bent, then look at what's around you that you could help, and put your energies there because it's positive, and particularly if you're cleaning something or protecting something that needs cleaned and protective, or if you're seeding the next generation of young kids to understand ecology and some of the challenges Earth is going to be facing in coming decades.
It's the biggie, or one of several biggies that we're all looking at. And Doug, I hope you'll come back and bring us more up to speed as this administration works its way through history. Hope you
Pat,
can do so.
anytime you ask, I'm there. You're the best. You're so good at what you do. And I deeply appreciate you and your whole body of work, and you're special to me. So keep it going.
Thanks, Doug. Everybody feels very much the same way about you and the work and the contributions you've made. So thanks again. Thanks to all of you who are watching. Thank you to our sponsors and our supporters. Next time we have, as you see on the screen, Andrew Weissman talking with Warren Olney. After that, David Axelrod with Madeline Brand. A big lineup of big hitters all through the summer. So you can come back here and we can keep up with us and with the doings and changes that are going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. I'm Pat Morrison. We sure appreciate you joining us this evening.